Vernon's knife pressed against Lily's ribs. Blood stained her dress. "Back off, Mercer, or I gut her right here." Jack's hand moved to his Colt, but he was too far away. Vernon was going to kill her, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Then Lily's eyes met his across the dusty ground. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging. Even with death breathing on her neck, she maintained that quiet dignity that had first caught his attention. She mouthed two words, "Trust me." But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the day a slap echoed across Dust Creek like a gunshot. The slap echoed across Dust Creek like a gunshot, sharp, clean, final. Jackson Mercer heard it from 30 feet away, standing in the brutal August sun outside the Dusty Rose Saloon. His weathered hand froze halfway to the hitching post, where his horse waited patient and dust-covered. The sound cut through the lazy afternoon silence like a knife through silk, and something in Jack's chest tightened. He turned his head slowly. The general store window was thick with desert grime, but he could see through it well enough. A man's hand rose and fell. A young woman's head snapped to the side. Her dark hair whipped across her face like a flag in a storm wind. She didn't cry. Jack watched as she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met cruelty with a silence that carried more dignity than most men earned in a lifetime. The August heat pressed down on everything. 105 degrees, maybe more, the kind of heat that made thinking hard and moving harder. But Jack's mind was suddenly razor-sharp. His fingers slid toward the handle of his Colt .45 before he even realized he was moving. 5 years of hunting dangerous men across the Arizona Territory had taught him to mind his own business. Keep your head down, collect the bounty, move on. Don't get involved in the small tragedies of small towns. There were too many of them, and one man couldn't fix them all. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, written in ash and blood, and the smell of burning timber that still haunted his dreams. But something about the girl's calm strength felt familiar in a way that twisted painfully in his chest. It reminded him of someone he had already failed, someone he could never save now. Through the dusty glass their eyes met. Hers were dark as midnight, deep as desert wells, filled with pride and pain, and 3 long years of suffering buried beneath quiet courage. In that single moment, stretched thin as spider silk, Jack understood that walking away was no longer an option. Whether he wanted it or not, his trail had just crossed hers. Nothing would ever be the same. Jack Mercer was 42 years old, and he had stopped believing in second chances somewhere around his 40th birthday. His face carried the map of every hard mile since that terrible September night in Tombstone. The deep lines around his eyes weren't from smiling. The scar across his left cheek wasn't from shaving. The gray in his dark hair wasn't from age. It was from that one night when the world burned and took everything with it. One dead rustler. One long ride home through darkness. One house burned to the ground before dawn could break. Sarah and little Emma gone before he could even pull them from the ashes. The images lived behind his eyes like permanent scars. Sarah's wedding ring melted into blackened bone. Emma's rag doll clutched in small hands that would never grow. The smell that no amount of whiskey could wash away. Now he drifted from town to town like tumbleweeds blown by winds he couldn't control. He earned his living with fast hands and a reputation built on broken justice. Folks called him Fast Draw Mercer, a name that opened doors in the daylight and closed hearts at night. 23 men had died by his gun in 5 years. All of them had bounties on their heads. All of them deserved what they got. But it never felt like enough. He had come to Dust Creek chasing a $200 bounty on a rustler named Billy Dawson. Billy the Rat. They called him a man who stole cattle and horses with equal enthusiasm and slightly less intelligence. Easy money. 3 days of tracking, maybe 4. Then back on the trail to nowhere in particular. But the sound of that slap pushed every thought of bounty hunting from his mind. Inside the store, the young woman crouched on the floor now, picking up shards from a broken whiskey bottle. She moved the way someone moves when they have learned that even a small mistake can cost them blood. Careful. Precise. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained calm. The man stood over her like a storm cloud ready to break. Vernon Hargrave. Jack had heard the name already spoken in whispers by the Mexican bartender who'd served him rot-gut whiskey an hour ago. Owner of the general store, owner of half the buildings on Main Street, owner, some said, of the sheriff himself. Vernon was 50 years old and running hard toward 60, fat in the way that comes from prosperity and laziness combined. His face was red from anger or heat or both. Sweat stained his shirt in dark patches under his arms and across his back. His hands were thick and meaty, more used to pointing than working. Clumsy half-breed. Vernon's voice cut through the window glass. Thick, harsh, enjoying itself. That bottle cost me $2. $2 you'll pay off at 50 cents a week. The girl didn't answer. She reached for another piece of glass, placing each shard carefully in her apron. The turquoise necklace at her throat caught the sun for just a moment, bright blue against brown skin. It looked old, precious. The last thing her mother had ever given her, Jack would learn later. Right now it was just a flash of color in a world gone gray. Jack pushed open the door to the general store. The bell above chimed once clear and sharp. Vernon turned the sneer already forming on his face. It froze halfway when he saw the man filling the doorway. Jack stood 6'2" in his boots. Not huge, but solid. The kind of solid that comes from years of hard riding and harder living. His gray eyes swept the room, taking in every detail in the space between heartbeats. The raised hand still curled into a fist. The girl's shaking fingers, the fear that hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. The back door closed and probably locked. The rifle behind the counter too far for Vernon to reach quickly. The deputy in the corner hand resting on his gun belt, trying to look tough and only managing to look nervous. "Problem here, mister." Jack's voice was quiet, flat, the kind of quiet that made smart men think twice. Vernon scoffed. Some of the fear leaked out of his eyes, replaced by the false courage of a man who thinks he has the law on his side. "Just teaching my worker some manners. Nothing that concerns you, stranger." Jack's eyes returned to the girl. She stared back, her face a mask of bruises old and new, left cheek swollen, bottom lip split, a yellow bruise fading on her jaw, but her spirit shone through the damage like sunlight through dirty glass. He saw courage flickering beneath the pain, like an ember waiting for wind. She couldn't have been more than 19 years old. "That's your worker?" Jack asked. "Bought and paid for," Vernon said, puffing out his chest. "Legal contract. She owes me money and she works it off. That's how business works, stranger. Maybe you should go back to wherever you came from and mind your own affairs." The deputy shifted his weight. His name was Marcus Webb. Jack would learn later. 30 years old, mean eyes, the kind of man who enjoyed watching other people suffer because it made him feel powerful. Right now he was trying to decide if Jack was worth the trouble of a fight. Jack took one slow step into the store. The floorboards creaked under his boots. "Slavery's been illegal since '65. That's 18 years ago in case you lost count." Vernon's face went darker red. "This ain't slavery. This is an employment contract, all legal and proper." "Let me see it." "I don't have to show you nothing." "Then I guess it's not legal after all." The girl rose slowly from the floor, still holding pieces of broken glass in her apron. For the first time she spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying a strength that belied the trembling in her hands. "I signed papers 3 years ago to pay for my mother's burial." Jack's jaw tightened. "How much?" $50, she said. "And how much have you paid off?" Vernon cut in before she could answer. "That's none of your business, stranger. Now I'm asking you politely to leave my store before I have Deputy Webb here arrest you for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Jack didn't move. He kept his eyes on the girl. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Then, with a small lift of her chin, "Lily Winterhawk." Something passed between them in that moment. Not attraction, not yet. Something deeper and more fragile. Recognition. Two people who had both known suffering looking at each other across a dusty room and seeing something they thought was lost forever. Hope. "Miss Winterhawk," Jack said slowly, "if you want to leave this place, I'll make sure you get out safely." Vernon exploded. Now you listen here, I've got legal papers. I've got the law on my side. You can't just come into my store and steal my property." "She's not property," Jack said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "And if you put your hands on her again, legal papers won't matter." Deputy Webb finally found his courage. He stepped forward, hand dropping to his gun. "That's a threat, stranger. I heard it clear. You're under arrest for threatening a lawful businessman." Jack turned his head slightly, just enough to look at Webb. "You really want to do this?" Webb's hand wavered. Something in Jack's eyes made him reconsider. The deputy had probably never faced a man who killed for a living, had never seen the kind of calm that comes from having nothing left to lose. He could see it now written in the weathered lines of Jack's face and the steady weight of his gaze. "I thought not," Jack said quietly. But Vernon wasn't finished. He grabbed Lily by the arm hard enough to make her wince. "This one's mine. I don't care who you are or where you're from. In this town, I'm the law. I own the store, I own the land, and I own her until her debt is paid. Now get out before I have you shot for trespassing." Jack's hand moved to his Colt. The room went very still. Vernon's eyes widened. Webb's hand froze on his gun, not quite drawing, not quite letting go. Lily stood perfectly motionless, barely breathing. Jack didn't draw the weapon. He just let his hand rest there, fingers curled around the worn wooden grip. The threat was clear enough without words. "Let her go," Jack said. Vernon released Lily's arm. Not because he wanted to, but because survival instinct finally overrode pride. His hand dropped to his side, and he stepped back half a pace. "This isn't over," Vernon said, trying to salvage some dignity. "You just made an enemy stranger, a powerful enemy. In this town, that's a death sentence." Jack smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Wouldn't be my first." He backed toward the door, slowly keeping both men in his line of sight. Lily moved with him, still clutching the broken glass in her apron, not quite believing what was happening. The bell chimed again as they stepped into the brutal afternoon heat. Outside, Jack finally took his hand off his gun. "You got somewhere safe to go?" Lily shook her head. "Nowhere. He owns the boarding house. He owns the saloon. He owns everything." Jack looked up and down Main Street. Dust Creek wasn't much of a town, maybe 40 buildings total. Half of them looked abandoned. The rest looked like they wished they were. The kind of place people ended up when they'd run out of other options. "There's got to be somewhere." "Grace Bennett," Lily said quietly. "She runs a small boarding house on the edge of town. Vernon doesn't own it. She might help." "Then that's where we'll go." "Why are you helping me?" Lily's dark eyes searched his face. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Jack was silent for a long moment, watching the dust devils dance in the street. How could he explain it? How could he tell her that he'd seen his dead wife in the way she refused to cry, that he'd failed to save Sarah and Emma? But maybe, just maybe, he could save someone else. That guilt was a heavier burden than any bounty, and redemption was worth more than gold. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally, "and I haven't done the right thing in a long time." They walked down Main Street together, a tall man in dusty black and a young Apache woman with broken glass still clinging to her apron. Behind them, through the store window, Vernon Hargrave watched them go. His face was a mask of rage barely contained. He turned to Deputy Webb. "Send word to Billy Dawson. Tell him there's an extra $100 if he deals with this stranger, and send someone to fetch Sheriff Reed. We've got a problem that needs solving." Webb nodded and hurried out the back door. Vernon stood alone in his store, surrounded by goods and merchandise and the empty success of a life built on the suffering of others. His hands clenched into fists. Nobody made a fool of Vernon Hargrave in his own town. Nobody. That evening, as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of blood and fire, Jack sat in the dusty Rose Saloon nursing a whiskey that tasted like regret. He'd left Lily safely at Grace Bennett's boarding house, a small building at the far end of town where dust and hope seemed to gather in equal measure. Grace had welcomed Lily without question, her kind eyes taking in the bruises and understanding everything that didn't need to be said. She was 60 years old, widowed for 5, and ran her boarding house with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to survive on her own terms. The rooms were clean if small, the food was simple but honest, and Grace had a spine of steel wrapped in grandmother's warmth. Now Jack sat alone trying to figure out his next move. Helping Lily had felt right in the moment, but he knew Vernon wouldn't let this go. Men like him never did. Pride was worth more than sense to that kind of person, and Jack had just humiliated him in front of witnesses. The bartender, a Mexican man named Carlos, set down a fresh glass without being asked. "You got trouble coming, amigo?" "Usually do. Vernon Hargrave, he's not a man who forgives, and Sheriff Reed, he's in Vernon's pocket deep." Jack took a slow sip of whiskey. "Sheriff Reed, the law around here. Only law we got. Used to be decent, or so they say, but money talks louder than conscience in a small town. Vernon pays him well to look the other way." "Look the other way from what?" Carlos glanced around the empty saloon, making sure they were alone. Then he leaned in close, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There's been cattle going missing. Horses, too. Folks think it's rustlers working the ranches north of here, but the stolen livestock, it ends up in Vernon's barn sometimes. I seen it with my own eyes once couple months back. He's running them through, selling them on to buyers in Tucson with fake bills of sale." Jack's eyes narrowed. "And nobody's reported this to who? Sheriff Reed. He's part of it. U.S. Marshal comes through maybe twice a year, and Vernon makes sure everything looks clean when that happens. The ranchers who complain they find their wells poisoned or their barns burned, everyone's learned to keep quiet." "What about the girl Lily? How'd she end up working for him?" Carlos's face grew sad. "Her mother died 3 years ago. Consumption. Lily was just 16, alone in the world. Her father was some white trader who passed through the reservation years back, never stayed. Vernon showed up with papers, said Lily owed $50 for her mother's burial. Said he'd paid for it himself out of Christian charity, and all she had to do was work it off. 1 year, he told her. Just 1 year of honest work. But it's been 3. Every time she gets close to paying it off, Vernon adds new debts, says she broke something, ate too much food, used too much lamp oil. 50 cents a week he pays her. Do the math. At that rate, she'd be working for him until she's an old woman." Jack's jaw tightened. The whiskey burned going down, but not as much as the anger burning in his chest. "That's slavery. Debt bondage, they call it. Illegal in Arizona territory, but who's going to enforce the law when the sheriff's corrupt Vernon's done it before, too? Had a Chinese man working for him couple years back, same arrangement. Man died of a fever before he could pay off his debt. Vernon sold the body to the medical college in Tucson for $10. The saloon door swung open and a woman entered. She was older, dressed in black, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd survived more than her share of hardship. Grace Bennett. She spotted Jack and crossed the room with purpose. "Mr. Mercer," she said, pulling out a chair without invitation and sitting down. "We need to talk." Jack gestured to the empty seat. "I'm listening." "That girl you brought to me, Lily. She told me what happened at Vernon's store. I couldn't just stand by." "I know, and I'm grateful, but you need to understand what you've started." Grace folded her hands on the table. They were work-worn hands, scarred and calloused but steady. "Vernon Hargrave owns half this town, as you've probably heard. But it's worse than that. He owns the people, too. Not with chains, but with debt and fear and a sheriff who'll look the other way when convenient. So I've heard. Lily's a good girl, too good for the life she's been given. Her mother, Morning Star, was one of the kindest souls I ever knew. Taught Lily everything: how to read and write, how to work with healing herbs, how to stand tall even when the world tries to knock you down. When Morning Star died, Lily was lost. Vernon saw that vulnerability and exploited it. Why hasn't anyone helped her before now?" Grace's eyes went hard. "Because she's Apache, because she's poor, because this town turns a blind eye when the person suffering doesn't look like them." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But she's also proud. She wouldn't accept charity, wouldn't beg. just worked herself to the bone trying to pay off a debt that Vernon kept adding to like interest on a loan from the devil himself. Jack was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I'm just telling you what you're up against. Vernon will come for her. He'll use the law, or he'll use Billy Dawson and his gang of rustlers, or he'll use Deputy Webb. He won't let this go." "Then I won't either." Grace studied his face in the lamplight. "You've got ghosts in your eyes, Mr. Mercer, the kind that come from losing people you loved." Jack's hand tightened around his whiskey glass. "That obvious? I'm old. I've seen that look before. My husband had it after our son died in the war, carried it until the day he passed." She reached across the table and patted his hand once, gentle and brief. "The thing about ghosts, Mr. Mercer, is that you can't bring them back, but you can honor them by protecting the living." She rose from the table and turned to leave. At the door she paused and looked back. "Lily's in the room at the end of the hall, second floor. She'll be safe there tonight, but tomorrow is another story. Vernon moves fast when he feels threatened." After Grace left, Jack sat alone with his whiskey and his thoughts. The saloon filled slowly as evening deepened into night. Cowboys and ranch hands, drifters and gamblers all looking for a drink and a moment's escape from whatever drove them. The piano player in the corner started up a sad tune, all minor keys and broken promises. Jack's mind drifted back to Tombstone, to Sarah. They'd met when he was 28 and she was 30, both of them old enough to know what they wanted. She'd been a school teacher, patient and kind, with a laugh that could light up a room. She'd seen past his rough edges to the man underneath and somehow decided he was worth her time. They'd married 6 months after meeting, and Emma came along 2 years later. 7 years of happiness. 7 years of a life that felt real and solid and permanent. Then one night of pursuit, one rustler's bullet, one act of revenge, and it all turned to ash. He'd buried them in the Tombstone cemetery under a shared headstone. Sarah Mercer, Emma Mercer, beloved wife and daughter. He'd stood there in the rain hat in hand and made a promise. He'd find the men responsible and make them pay. It took him 3 months to hunt down Blackjack Morgan's gang. 4 men in total. He'd killed 3 of them in fair gunfights, collected the bounties, and used the money to buy flowers for Sarah's grave. The 4th man, the one who'd actually lit the fire, had escaped into Mexico. Jack had followed, found him in a cantina in Hermosillo, and shot him in the back. It was the only time Jack Mercer had ever killed a man who wasn't facing him. The only time he'd broken his own code. And it hadn't made him feel better. It hadn't brought Sarah and Emma back. It had just added one more ghost to the collection, haunting his dreams. After that, he'd become a bounty hunter. It was easier than being a lawman. You didn't have to care about justice, just about getting paid. You didn't have to worry about right and wrong, just about dead or alive. It was simple, clean. Or at least it had been until this afternoon, when a slap echoing like a gunshot had reminded him that some things still mattered. The piano player finished his sad song and started another. Jack finished his whiskey and stood up. Tomorrow he'd figure out his next move. Tonight he'd try to sleep without dreaming of fire. The next morning broke clear and hot, the sun climbing into a cloudless sky like a judge ascending to the bench. Jack rose early, splashed water on his face from the basin in his room, and dressed in the same dusty clothes he'd worn yesterday. He strapped on his gun belt, checked the Colt to make sure it was loaded, and headed downstairs. Grace was in the kitchen cooking eggs and bacon on a wood stove that made the small room feel like an oven. The smell was heavenly. Jack's stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since yesterday noon. "Sit," Grace commanded, pointing to a rough wooden table. "You look like you need a proper meal." Jack sat. A moment later, Grace set a plate in front of him, loaded with eggs, bacon biscuits, and a cup of coffee strong enough to strip paint. He ate in silence, grateful for the food and the quiet. Grace worked around him, cleaning up, preparing more food, moving with the efficient grace of someone who'd done these motions 10,000 times before. Lily appeared in the doorway, hesitant. Her face looked better in the morning light, or maybe Jack was just getting used to the bruises. She wore the same worn dress from yesterday, but Grace had given her a shawl to cover her shoulders. The turquoise necklace caught the light. "Morning," Jack said. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer." "Just Jack is fine." She nodded and sat down across from him. Grace brought her a plate smaller than Jack's, but still generous. Lily ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned not to take food for granted. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? They were strangers, thrown together by circumstance, bound by a moment of violence, and a shared recognition that something had to change. The silence was comfortable enough, broken only by the clink of forks on plates and the distant sound of horses in the street. After breakfast, Jack pushed back from the table. "I need to take care of some business. You'll be safe here with Grace." Lily nodded. "Where are you going?" "To finish what I came here for. Then maybe to have a conversation with Sheriff Reed about legal contracts and illegal slavery." "Be careful," Grace said. "Vernon will have told the sheriff about yesterday by now. Reed will be looking for an excuse to arrest you, or worse." "I'm always careful." That was a lie, but it sounded good. Jack left the boarding house and walked back toward the center of town. Dust Creek was waking up slowly, people emerging from buildings to face another day of heat and hardship. He got a few curious looks from passers-by, but mostly people kept their heads down and their business to themselves. That was the way of small towns. Mind your own affairs and hope others minded theirs. The sheriff's office was a small adobe building next to the general store. Convenient for Vernon, Jack thought. He pushed open the door without knocking. Sheriff Clayton Reed sat behind a desk covered in wanted posters and old coffee cups. He was 55 years old, overweight, in the way that comes from sitting too much and moving too little. His badge was tarnished. His gun belt hung on a peg behind him, suggesting he didn't expect trouble this early in the morning. He looked up as Jack entered. "You must be the stranger who caused all the fuss yesterday." "Jackson Mercer. Sheriff Reed." The man didn't offer to shake hands. "Vernon Hargrave came by last night, made some serious accusations." "I'm sure he did." "Says you threatened him with a gun." "Threatened Deputy Webb, too. Says you tried to steal his property." "His property is a 19-year-old girl he's been keeping in debt bondage for 3 years. That's illegal." Reed leaned back in his chair, making it creak. "Now, Mr. Mercer, you seem like a reasonable man. I'm sure we can clear up this misunderstanding without anyone getting hurt. Vernon has legal papers, a signed contract, all proper and above board. Debt bondage has been illegal in Arizona Territory since 1873. That's 10 years ago. Maybe so, but employment contracts are still legal. Man's entitled to be paid for work done, and a woman who owes money is entitled to work it off. That's just common sense." Jack sat down uninvited in the chair across from Reed. "Let me see the contract." "I don't have it here." "Then let's go see Vernon and look at it together." Reed's face hardened slightly. "Mr. Mercer, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but you're making it difficult. Why don't you just move along? Dust Creek is a peaceful town. We don't need outsiders stirring up trouble." "I came here for Billy Dawson, $200 bounty on his head for cattle rustling. You know where I can find him." The question caught Reed off guard. His eyes flickered with something. Worry, guilt. Billy Dawson never heard of him. "Really? Because I have it on good authority, he's been operating in this area for months, stealing cattle from ranches north of here." "Well, I don't know about that. We don't have much trouble with rustlers in Dust Creek." "That's interesting because Vernon Hargrave's barn seems to be a regular stopping point for stolen livestock. Funny coincidence, don't you think?" Reed's hand moved slowly toward the desk drawer. Jack's hand moved faster to his Colt. The sheriff froze. "Don't," Jack said quietly. They stayed like that for a long moment. Two men measuring each other across a dusty office, weighing the cost of violence against the price of backing down. Reed was the first to blink. "You're making a big mistake, Mercer." "Wouldn't be my first. Now I'm going to walk out of here. You're going to stay in that chair. And tomorrow, I'm going to come back with proof that Vernon Hargrave is running stolen cattle through this town and paying you to look the other way. Then we'll see who's making mistakes." Jack stood and backed toward the door, keeping his hand on his gun until he was outside. His heart was pounding, but his hand was steady. That was the difference between a man who killed for money and a man who killed for sport. Control. He walked quickly away from the sheriff's office, heading toward the edge of town where the desert began. He needed to find Billy Dawson, not just for the bounty anymore, but because Billy was the key to unraveling Vernon's operation. If Jack could get proof, real proof, he could bring in the U.S. Marshal from Fort Apache and end this whole rotten situation. He'd asked around last night, carefully buying drinks for cowboys who looked like they might know things. One of them, drunk enough to be honest, had mentioned that Billy sometimes camped near a place called Rattlesnake Canyon, about 5 miles north of town. It was as good a place as any to start looking. Jack retrieved his horse from the livery stable, paying the boy who worked there an extra $1 to keep his mouth shut about which direction he'd ridden. Then he headed north, following a trail that wound between red rock formations and scattered Palo Verde trees. The desert was beautiful in its own harsh way. Endless blue sky, rocks painted in shades of rust and copper, cactus standing like silent sentinels. Jack had grown to appreciate the desert over the years. It was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It would kill you if you weren't careful, but it would do so openly without lies or deception. Rattlesnake Canyon turned out to be a narrow cleft between 2 tall mesas, shaded and relatively cool. There was water there, a thin stream that flowed from somewhere underground. Perfect place to camp if you were trying to stay hidden. Jack dismounted and approached on foot, moving quietly. His years as a hunter served him well. He spotted the camp before they spotted him. 4 men, rough-looking characters with the kind of faces that suggested they'd made poor life choices. Horses tethered nearby, a small fire burning despite the heat, and cattle, maybe 20 head grazing in a natural corral formed by the canyon walls. He recognized Billy Dawson from the wanted poster. Thin man, sharp features, nervous eyes. Billy sat near the fire cleaning a rifle, talking to another man Jack didn't recognize. The other 2 were sleeping in the shade of the canyon wall. But Jack's attention was drawn to something else. Beyond the sleeping men partially hidden behind a stack of supplies, he could see paperwork. Account books, maybe. Bills of sale. Exactly what he needed. The smart move would be to ride back to town, get help, come back with force. But Jack wasn't feeling particularly smart today. He was feeling angry. Angry at Vernon. Angry at Sheriff Reed. Angry at a system that let men like them profit off the suffering of people like Lily. Angry at himself for letting Sarah and Emma die while he chased glory and bounties. He drew his Colt and stepped into the camp. "Morning, gentlemen. Billy Dawson, you're under arrest." 4 men scrambled for weapons. Jack fired twice fast and accurate. The 2 shots echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Billy's rifle flew from his hands, the stock shattered by Jack's bullet. The man next to Billy grabbed for a pistol and found himself staring down the barrel of Jack's Colt instead. "Don't," Jack said. The 2 sleeping men woke up confused and terrified. One of them, smarter than the others, raised his hands immediately. The other reached for a gun and got a bullet in the dirt 6 inches from his hand for his trouble. "Next one goes in your leg," Jack said. "Your choice." The man raised his hands. "Billy Dawson," Jack said, keeping his gun trained on the group. "I'm bringing you in for cattle rustling. You other gentlemen have 2 choices. You can ride out of here right now, and I'll forget I saw you, or you can join Billy in facing justice. Decide quickly." 3 men chose life over loyalty. They mounted up and rode out fast, leaving Billy sitting alone by the fire, hands raised, face pale. "You can't do this," Billy said. "Vernon will have your head." "Funny you should mention Vernon." Jack crossed to the stack of supplies and found what he was looking for. Account books. Detailed records of stolen cattle bills of sale with Vernon Hargrave's signature payments made to Sheriff Reed. Everything he needed. "This is evidence of a conspiracy," Jack said, flipping through the pages. "Vernon's been buying stolen cattle, selling them with fake papers, and paying the sheriff to ignore it. And you, Billy, you're going to testify to all of this when the U.S. Marshal arrives." "I ain't testifying to nothing." "Then you'll hang for murder." "I never killed nobody." "No, but Vernon did. Or did you forget about the Chinese man who died working off his debt? Or the rancher who complained about stolen cattle and ended up with a burned barn and dead horses? Vernon's hands are dirty, Billy, and he's about to wash them with your blood unless you cooperate. Billy's face went even paler. If I testify, Vernon will kill me. If you don't testify, the law will hang you. Pick your poison. Billy chose survival. Jack tied him up, threw him over a horse, and gathered the account books into his saddlebag. Then he started the long ride back to Dust Creek, feeling better than he had in years. For the first time since Sarah and Emma died, he'd done something that felt like actual justice instead of revenge dressed up in legal paperwork. The ride back took most of the afternoon. Jack pushed hard, wanting to get Billy secured before Vernon realized what was happening. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Dust Creek came into view again, shimmering in the heat haze like a mirage. He rode straight to the sheriff's office, Billy bouncing uncomfortably on the horse behind him. A crowd started to gather, people emerging from buildings to see what the commotion was about. Jack dismounted, pulled Billy down, and marched him toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Reed emerged looking surprised and angry in equal measure. Behind him came Deputy Webb, hand already on his gun. "What's the meaning of this?" Reed demanded. "Brought you Billy Dawson," Jack said loudly, making sure the growing crowd could hear every word. "Wanted for cattle rustling, but that's not all I found." He pulled out the account books and held them up. Detailed records of stolen cattle, bills of sale with Vernon Hargrave's signature, payments made to you, Sheriff Reed, to look the other way. Everything documented, nice and neat. The crowd murmured. Vernon Hargrave pushed through from the direction of the general store, his face red with rage. Deputy Webb's hand tightened on his gun. "Those are forgeries," Vernon shouted. "Lies. This man is a criminal. Arrest him, Sheriff." "These are in your handwriting, Vernon," Jack said, opening one of the books to a random page. Detailed accounts. June 1882, 35 head of cattle from Murphy Ranch, $700. July 1882, 42 head from Callahan Farm, $840. The crowd murmured louder. Jack recognized some of the names he was reading. Local ranchers, people who'd lost livestock and blamed rustlers. Now they knew the truth. And here, Jack continued, flipping to another page, payments to Sheriff Reed, 20% of every sale, for keeping the law off Vernon's back. He pulled out a letter from his jacket, one he'd found tucked between the pages of the account book. And this, a letter from Reed to Vernon. Quote, "Keep sending 20% my way, and I'll keep the law off your back." Signed, Clayton Reed. Care to explain that, Sheriff? The crowd erupted. Angry voices, accusations, demands for answers. Reed looked around desperately, realizing his comfortable corruption was crumbling around him. "It's a lie," Reed shouted. "A forgery. This stranger comes into our town making wild accusations with no proof." "The handwriting matches yours," Jack said calmly. "And Billy Dawson here is willing to testify about the whole operation. Aren't you, Billy?" Billy, sensing which way the wind was blowing, nodded frantically. "It's all true. Vernon's been buying stolen cattle for years. Sheriff Reed takes his cut. Everyone in Vernon's operation knows about it." Vernon lunged forward, face twisted with rage. "You little rat, I'll kill you." Deputy Webb drew his gun, but Jack was faster. His Colt was out and aimed at Webb before the deputy could get a shot off. "Drop it," Jack said. The crowd backed away, giving them space. Webb looked at Vernon, at Reed, at the angry faces surrounding them. Slowly, he lowered his gun. At that moment, a voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Lily stood at the edge of the crowd, Grace Bennett beside her. She'd been hiding, but hearing the commotion, she'd come to see what was happening. Her eyes met Jack's across the dusty street. Vernon saw her and smiled, ugly and mean. "There's my property. Trying to steal her from me, Mercer. That's theft." "She's not property," Jack said. "And your so-called contract is illegal. Debt bondage has been against the law in Arizona Territory since 1873. I have papers." "Then show them, right now, in front of everyone." Vernon hesitated. The crowd pressed closer, demanding answers. Someone shouted, "Show us the contract, Vernon." Others took up the cry, Vernon's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. "It's back at the store. I don't carry it around." "Then let's go get it," Jack said. "Right now. All of us." The crowd moved as one toward the general store. Vernon had no choice but to go along, surrounded by angry townspeople who were finally asking questions they should have asked years ago. Inside the store, Vernon fumbled with papers, clearly stalling. "I'll need a few minutes to find it." "You've got 30 seconds, Jack said. Finally, Vernon produced a document. It was yellowed with age, clearly homemade. Jack read it quickly, then showed it to several people in the crowd who could read. "This isn't a legal contract," he announced. "It's a handwritten agreement with no legal force. More importantly, even if it were legal, debt bondage was outlawed 10 years ago. Lily Winterhawk has been held in slavery, pure and simple. She owes Vernon nothing. She's free to go." Lily stepped forward through the crowd. She was trembling, but her voice was steady. "I was never your property. Not ever." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little savage. After everything I did for you, I gave you a job, a place to stay, food to eat." "You beat me," Lily said quietly. "Every day. You starved me. You worked me until I collapsed. You stole 3 years of my life, and I am not grateful." The crowd's mood had shifted completely now. People were looking at Vernon with disgust. Someone spat on the ground near his feet. Deputy Webb had quietly backed away, no longer willing to defend his corrupt employer. Sheriff Reed made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Now listen here, we can't just take the word of some drifter and a half-breed girl." He didn't finish the sentence. A solid punch from one of the townspeople, a rancher named Tom Harrison, whose cattle had been stolen 2 years ago, sent Reed sprawling on the ground. "That's for my livestock," Harrison said. Others crowded in. Not to attack, but to surround Vernon and Reed, making sure they couldn't escape. The tide had turned completely. The corruption that had poisoned Dust Creek for years was finally being exposed to sunlight, and it was withering under the glare. Grace Bennett pushed through the crowd to stand beside Lily, putting an arm around the younger woman's shoulders. "It's over, child. You're free." Lily looked at Jack, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Not from sadness, from relief, from the weight of 3 years of suffering finally being lifted. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack nodded once, uncomfortable with gratitude. He'd only done what anyone should have done. What he should have done for Sarah, for Emma, if he'd been there instead of chasing bounties and glory. One of the townspeople, a woman named Margaret who owned the bakery, stepped forward. "Someone needs to ride to Fort Apache. Get the U.S. Marshal here to sort this out proper." "I'll go," Tom Harrison volunteered. "I can be there and back in 3 days." The crowd agreed. In the meantime, Vernon and Reed were locked in the sheriff's own jail, guarded by townspeople taking shifts. Deputy Webb was given a choice: leave town or join his former employers in a cell. He chose to leave. As the crowd dispersed, the excitement slowly draining into exhausted relief, Jack found himself standing alone in the street with Lily and Grace. "What happens now?" Lily asked. "The marshal will come sort everything out. Vernon and Reed will face justice. You'll be free to go wherever you want." "I don't have anywhere to go," Lily said softly. "The reservation where I grew up, San Carlos, it's 3 days' ride from here. I haven't been back in 3 years. I don't even know if anyone there still remembers me." Grace squeezed her shoulder. "You can stay with me as long as you need, dear. No charge. You've paid enough." Lily smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I need to go back to San Carlos. I need to see my mother's grave. I need to tell her I'm free." Jack found himself saying, "I'll take you there. After the marshal comes and this is all settled, I'll escort you to San Carlos. Make sure you get there safe." "Why would you do that?" Lily asked. "You've already done so much." "Because you remind me of someone I failed to save?" Jack thought. "Because helping you feels like honoring their memory. Because for the first time in 5 years I feel like I'm doing something that matters." But what he said was, "Because it's the right thing to do." That evening, after the dust had settled and the town had returned to an uneasy calm, Jack sat alone in his room at Grace Bennett's boarding house. The account books were secured with the mayor pending the marshal's arrival. Billy Dawson was locked up singing like a canary about Vernon's operation in exchange for leniency. Vernon and Reed were behind bars, their reign of corruption finally ended. Jack should have felt satisfied, victorious. He'd come to Dust Creek for a $200 bounty and ended up freeing a young woman from slavery and exposing a criminal conspiracy. It was more good than he'd done in 5 years combined, but all he felt was tired. He pulled out a small leather pouch from his saddlebag. Inside was a locket, Sarah's locket. He'd carried it every day since she died, a reminder of what he'd lost. He opened it with fingers that had shot men, but trembled when touching this delicate gold chain. Sarah's face looked back at him from the miniature painting inside, smiling, young, full of life. Next to her was Emma, captured at age 5 before she'd learned to be afraid of anything. "I met someone today," Jack said to the locket, his voice barely above a whisper. "A young woman named Lily. She reminds me of you, Sarah. Not in how she looks, but in how she refuses to break, in how she stands tall even when the world tries to knock her down. I helped her today. Maybe I can help her more. Maybe that counts for something." The locket didn't answer. It never did. But holding it made Jack feel connected to something beyond bounties and bullets and the endless desert roads that led nowhere in particular. Tomorrow the marshal would come. The wheels of justice would turn slow but inexorable. Vernon would face trial for conspiracy, fraud, assault, and half a dozen other charges. Reed would lose his badge and probably his freedom. Billy Dawson would testify and maybe get a lighter sentence. And Lily would go home to San Carlos, back to her mother's grave and the memories of a life before Vernon Hargrave stole 3 years from her. Jack would make sure she got there safely. It was the least he could do. Maybe in some small way it would make up for not being there when Sarah and Emma needed him. He closed the locket and tucked it back into his shirt close to his heart. Then he lay down on the narrow bed, boots still on, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally claimed him. Outside, the desert night spread across the sky in a blanket of stars. Coyotes sang their ancient songs. The wind whispered through the Palo Verde trees. And in a small boarding house at the edge of a small town, 2 people who had known loss and suffering slept under the same roof, separated by walls and floors and the weight of their own histories, but connected by a single moment when one person chose to do the right thing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Jackson Mercer slept without dreaming of fire. 3 days passed before the U.S. Marshal arrived from Fort Apache. Marshal William Hartley was a man in his 50s, weathered by years of enforcing federal law across the brutal expanse of Arizona Territory. He wore his authority like a well-worn coat, comfortable but commanding respect. His eyes were sharp despite the lines around them, and he listened carefully as Jack laid out the evidence. The account books, Billy Dawson's testimony, the forged bills of sale, letters between Vernon and Sheriff Reed detailing their arrangement, the fake contract Vernon had used to keep Lily in bondage. Hartley examined each piece of evidence with methodical precision, asking questions, cross-referencing dates and signatures, building a case that would hold up in federal court. By the end of the second day, his verdict was clear. Vernon Hargrave will stand trial for conspiracy, fraud, human trafficking, and receiving stolen goods, Hartley announced in the town hall, speaking to a crowd that packed the building to capacity. Sheriff Clayton Reed faces similar charges plus corruption and dereliction of duty. Deputy Marcus Webb has already fled the territory, and there's a warrant out for his arrest. The crowd erupted in a mixture of relief and vindication. Years of corruption were finally being addressed. Justice long delayed was finally arriving. Hartley continued, "As for Miss Lily Winterhawk, the so-called contract is null and void. She owes Vernon Hargrave nothing. In fact, based on 3 years of unpaid labor at standard wages, Hargrave owes her approximately $300. That debt will be settled from his assets before they're seized by the federal government." Lily stood at the back of the hall with Grace Bennett, tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness now, but from the overwhelming reality of freedom. 3 years of chains broken in 3 days. It felt impossible. It felt like waking from a nightmare into sunlight. After the meeting, Marshal Hartley approached Jack. "You did good work here, Mercer. This kind of corruption, it's like rot in wood. Spreads if you don't cut it out. Just happened to be in the right place. Or the wrong place, depending on how you look at it." Hartley smiled slightly. "Vernon's got friends in Tucson, business partners who won't be happy about this. You might want to watch your back." "I'm used to it." "I imagine you are." Hartley extended his hand. "The bounty on Billy Dawson is yours. $200. Plus there's a reward from the Cattlemen's Association for recovering information about the rustling operation. Another $100. I'll have the paperwork drawn up before I leave." Jack shook his hand. $300. More than enough to keep him moving for several months. More than enough to escort Lily to San Carlos and still have plenty left over. That evening, Jack found himself back at Grace Bennett's kitchen table. It had become a habit over the past 3 days, this quiet ritual of shared meals and comfortable silence. Grace cooked, Jack ate. Lily helped clean up. Simple, ordinary, the kind of life Jack had forgotten existed. "So you're really taking her to San Carlos?" Grace said, not quite a question. "Promised I would. It's a hard journey, 3 days through desert, and there's still the matter of Vernon's friends. They might try something before you leave town." "Let them try." Grace set down her dish towel and looked at him with those knowing eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to show. "You're a good man, Jackson Mercer. Don't let anyone tell you different, not even yourself." The words hit harder than expected. Jack busied himself with his coffee, not trusting his voice to stay steady. When had someone last called him Good Sarah, probably? 5 years ago. A lifetime ago. Lily entered from the back room where she'd been resting. She looked different now, Jack noticed. The bruises were fading. Her shoulders didn't hunch with defensive fear. She moved with more confidence, like someone remembering how to take up space in the world. "Mr. Mercer," she said, then corrected herself at his look. "Jack, I wanted to thank you again, for everything." "You've thanked me enough." "I'll never be able to thank you enough." She sat down across from him, her dark eyes serious. "You gave me back my life. That's not something you can repay with words. You don't need to repay anything. You didn't do anything wrong. I know that now. But for 3 years Vernon made me believe I was worthless, that I deserved what was happening to me, that I owed him for being alive." Her hands clenched on the table. "I believed it. That's the worst part. I actually believed it." Grace put a hand on Lily's shoulder. "That's what men like Vernon do. They break you down until you can't remember what it felt like to stand tall. But you never really broke, did you? You kept that dignity even when he tried to beat it out of you. My mother used to say, they can chain your body but your spirit flies free if you let it. I tried to remember that. Some days it was hard." Jack thought about Sarah and Emma, about how he'd let his own spirit get chained to the past, locked in a cell of guilt and grief. Maybe freedom wasn't just about physical chains. Maybe it was about the ones you forged for yourself, link by link, until you couldn't remember how to move without their weight. "When do you want to leave?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Lily said. "If that's not too soon. I need to see my mother's grave. I need to tell her I'm free. And I need to know if the reservation is still there, if the people I grew up with are still alive. Tomorrow works. We'll leave at dawn, travel during the cooler hours, rest during the worst heat. 3 days if we push 4, if we take it easier. I can handle a hard journey. I'm stronger than I look." Jack believed her. Anyone who survived 3 years of Vernon Hargrave was strong enough for anything. They set out the next morning, as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack rode his sturdy gelding, a horse that had carried him across half of Arizona without complaint. Lily rode a gentle mare that Grace had insisted on giving her, a gray horse with kind eyes and a steady gait. Grace stood in the doorway of her boarding house watching them go. She'd packed food for the journey, enough to last twice as long as needed. She'd also given Lily a blanket, a canteen, and a small leather pouch containing $20. "Just in case," Grace had said. A woman should always have her own money, makes her free to make her own choices. Now they rode through the empty streets of Dust Creek as the town slowly woke around them. A few early risers watched them pass. Tom Harrison raised a hand in farewell from his porch. Margaret from the bakery waved. Even the new acting sheriff, a decent man named Peters, who'd been deputized by Marshal Hartley, nodded his respect. Vernon Hargrave watched from behind the bars of his cell window, his face a mask of impotent rage. Jack met his eyes for just a moment, long enough to see the hatred there, then turned away. Vernon's power was broken. He was just another criminal now, waiting for justice to catch up with his crimes. The desert stretched before them, vast and empty and beautiful in its own harsh way. Jack had ridden these trails dozens of times, chasing bounties or running from memories, but this time felt different. This time he wasn't alone, and he wasn't running. He was moving towards something instead of away from it. They rode in comfortable silence for the first hour, letting the horses find their rhythm. The sun climbed steadily, and the temperature rose with it. By mid-morning, it was already pushing past 90 degrees. Jack called a halt near a cluster of Palo Verde trees that offered thin shade. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, dismounting. "Let the horses drink and cool down." Lily slid off her mare with practiced ease. She'd learned to ride as a child on the reservation, she'd told him, before Vernon, before everything went wrong. Now she moved around the horse with confidence, checking its hooves, running her hands along its flanks to check for sores or injuries. "You're good with horses," Jack observed. "My mother taught me. She said horses can sense when you're afraid or angry. They respond to calmness, to kindness." Lily smiled slightly. She was like that with people too, always calm, always kind, even when she was dying. What did she die from? Consumption. Tuberculosis. She coughed blood for months before the end. Lily's voice was steady, but Jack heard the old pain underneath. "We didn't have money for a doctor. The reservation didn't have medicine. I tried to help with herbs and prayers, but nothing worked. She got thinner and weaker until one morning she just didn't wake up. I'm sorry. She was 36 years old. That's not old enough to die." Lily looked out at the desert, her eyes distant. "That's when Vernon showed up, at the burial. He told me he'd paid for everything, the coffin and the burial plot and the marker. $50, he said. All I had to do was work for him for 1 year to pay it back. 1 year seemed reasonable. I was 16, alone, scared. I signed his papers." "You couldn't have known." "I should have. My mother always told me not to trust white men who smile too much. Vernon smiled a lot that day. I should have listened." They sat in the shade, sharing water and dried meat from Grace's provisions. The horses grazed on what sparse vegetation they could find. A lizard watched them from a nearby rock, doing push-ups in the heat. "Can I ask you something?" Lily said after a while. "Go ahead. What made you stop that day in the store? You could have walked away. Most people did. What made you different?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, watching dust devils dance across the desert floor. "I had a wife once, Sarah, and a daughter, Emma. They died 5 years ago when our house burned down. I wasn't there. I was chasing a rustler trying to be a hero. When I got back, they were already gone." Lily's hand moved to his arm, a brief touch of sympathy. "I'm so sorry. I told myself it was the rustler's fault. His gang burned my house for revenge after I killed their leader. And that's true. But it was also my fault for not being there, for choosing bounties over my family." He looked at her directly. "When I saw Vernon hit you through that window for just a second, I saw Sarah. The way she used to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. The way she never backed down from bullies. And I realized that I couldn't walk away. Not again. Not when I could actually do something." "You didn't fail them," Lily said softly. "You didn't know what would happen. That's what everyone says. Doesn't make it easier to live with." "No, but maybe helping someone else makes it mean something. My mother used to say that grief that doesn't transform into something good just turns into poison. Maybe you're transforming yours." Jack had never thought of it that way. Grief as something that could change shape, become something other than just weight and darkness. It was an interesting idea, maybe even a hopeful one. They rode on. The first day passed without incident, long hours of riding broken by rest stops in whatever shade they could find. They saw no other travelers on this route, which was both good and bad. Good because Vernon's friends wouldn't find them easily. Bad because if they ran into trouble, there'd be no help coming. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Jack found a good spot to camp. A small canyon with high walls that would shield their fire from view and a trickle of water that suggested a spring somewhere nearby. "We'll stop here for the night," he said. They made camp efficiently, falling into an easy division of labor. Jack tended the horses and gathered firewood. Lily found the spring and filled their canteens, then began preparing a simple meal from their supplies. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from two people who understand each other without needing constant conversation. After dinner, as the stars began appearing overhead in impossible numbers, they sat by the small fire and talked, really talked for the first time. Lily told him about growing up on the reservation, about her mother's stories and teachings, about the white father who'd never stayed, about learning to read from a missionary teacher who'd set up a school near San Carlos. Jack told her about his life before Sarah, about growing up in Texas, about becoming a lawman because it seemed like a way to make a difference, about slowly learning that justice and law weren't always the same thing. "Do you miss it?" Lily asked. "Being a lawman?" "Sometimes. There were good parts, helping people, stopping bad things from happening, but there was a lot of politics too. Rich men getting away with crimes, poor men hanging for small mistakes. After Sarah and Emma died, I couldn't pretend anymore that the system worked." "So you became a bounty hunter?" "At least it's honest. Bad men die, I get paid. No pretending it's about justice or making the world better. It's just business." "But you don't believe that," Lily said. "If you did, you wouldn't have helped me." Jack didn't have an answer for that. The fire burned low. The temperature dropped as desert nights do, from scorching to pleasant to cold. Lily pulled Grace's blanket around her shoulders. Jack added more wood to the fire, making it flare bright for a moment before settling back to steady warmth. "Can I ask you another question?" Lily said. "You're full of questions tonight." "I've had 3 years of not being allowed to ask questions. I'm making up for lost time." She smiled slightly. "Why are you really taking me to San Carlos?" "It's not about the bounty or the reward money. You could have left me with Grace and ridden on." Jack stared into the fire, watching flames dance and flicker. Why was he doing this? The easy answer was because it was the right thing. But there was more to it than that, something he barely wanted to admit to himself. "I need to know I can still do something good," he said finally. "For 5 years I've been killing men for money. Legal killing, but killing all the same. I needed to know I could still save someone instead of just punishing people who were already lost." "You did save me." "Not yet. Not until you're safe at San Carlos. Then I guess we'll both find out together." They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere a coyote howled. Another answered. The horses shuffled and snorted in their sleep. And two people who'd been broken by loss sat together under a sky full of stars, not quite healed, but maybe beginning to believe that healing was possible. Jack woke before dawn on the 3rd day to the sound of horses. Not their horses. Other horses. Coming fast. He was on his feet instantly, Colt in his hand, moving to wake Lily. She came awake silently, years of living with Vernon, having taught her to move quickly and quietly when danger threatened. "Someone's coming," Jack whispered. "At least 4 horses, maybe more. Vernon's friends, maybe, or just travelers, but we can't take chances." They doused the remains of their fire and moved the horses into deeper shadow. Jack positioned himself behind a boulder that gave him a clear view of the canyon entrance. Lily crouched beside him, holding a small knife she'd kept hidden during her time with Vernon. It wasn't much of a weapon, but Jack respected that she was willing to fight. The riders appeared as the sky began to lighten. 4 men, rough-looking, well-armed. Jack recognized the leader immediately. Snake Eye Pete, they called him. A scar running through his left eye gave him his nickname. He was a hired gun, the kind of man who did dirty work for anyone willing to pay. Vernon must have sent word before being arrested, maybe through Deputy Webb before he fled. A last act of spite hiring men to hunt down the girl who'd escaped his control. The riders stopped at the canyon entrance studying the ground. One of them pointed to tracks. Their tracks. Snake-Eye Pete smiled ugly and mean. "Fresh," he called out. "Can't be more than a few hours old. They're close." "What do we do with them when we find them?" another rider asked. "Boss said to bring the girl back alive if possible. She's worth $500 to some buyer in Mexico. The man with her, though he just needs to be dead." Jack's jaw tightened. So it was worse than he'd thought. Vernon wasn't just seeking revenge. He'd sold Lily before even losing her, and now these men were here to collect the merchandise and eliminate the witness. The riders started into the canyon, moving slowly, watching for ambush. Jack waited until they were committed, unable to retreat quickly. Then he stood up. Colt aimed at Snake-Eye Pete's chest. "That's far enough." The four men reined in hard horses, dancing nervously. Hands moved toward guns but froze when Jack's Colt didn't waver. "Mercer," Snake-Eye Pete said, recognition dawning. "Heard you were the one who got Vernon locked up." "Heard right. Now you boys have a choice. You can turn around and ride back where you came from, or you can try your luck with me. Your call." Pete laughed. 4 against 1. I like those odds." 3 against 1, Jack corrected. "You'll be dead before you hit the ground." "Big talk. Want to test it." For a moment the canyon held its breath. 4 men on horses, hands hovering near guns, weighing the odds. One man behind a boulder, Colt steady as stone eyes that said he'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to kill again. Then Lily stood up beside Jack, her small knife visible in her hand. 3 against 2, she said, her voice clear and strong. "And I'm not going back. Not alive. I'll die here first." Something in her voice and the absolute certainty of her words made the tension ratchet even higher. This wasn't a frightened girl anymore. This was a woman who'd found her spine, who'd tasted freedom, and would rather die than give it up. Snake-Eye Pete reassessed. He was a professional. Professionals knew when the job had gone bad. 4 men against 2 wasn't terrible odds in an open fight, but trapped in a canyon against someone like Jack Mercer. That was suicide dressed up as ambition. "Vernon's paying good money." Pete tried one more time. "Vernon's in jail and his assets are being seized by the federal government," Jack said. "Whatever he promised you he can't pay. You're working for free." That changed things. Pete's men shifted uneasily. Getting killed for a big payoff was one thing. Getting killed for nothing was just stupidity. "How much would it take for you boys to forget you saw us?" Jack asked. Pete considered. $200. I'll give you 50 to turn around right now and you get to live. That's my final offer." It wasn't a great deal, but it was better than dying. Pete looked at his men. They looked back. Some kind of silent consensus was reached. $50, Pete agreed. "But you better watch your back, Mercer. Vernon's got friends, lots of them. They won't all be as reasonable as me." "I'll take my chances." Jack lowered his gun slightly, a gesture of good faith. Lily pulled out the pouch Grace had given her and counted out $50. It was most of what Grace had provided, but staying alive was worth more than money. Pete took the cash, counted it, and nodded. "Pleasure doing business with you. Word of advice, though, don't take the main trail to San Carlos. Vernon's got people watching it. Go north through the Badlands. Harder riding, but safer." "Appreciate it." The 4 men turned their horses and rode out, moving faster than they'd come in. Jack and Lily stayed behind the boulder until the sound of hooves faded completely into silence. Lily let out a breath she'd been holding. "That was close. Too close. We need to move. Pete might be reasonable, but if he meets another group of hunters and tells them where we are, $50 won't buy us anything." They broke camp quickly and rode north as Pete had suggested, leaving the main trail for rougher country. The land grew more hostile, rock formations jutting up like broken teeth, deep arroyos that could hide a dozen ambushes, sparse vegetation that offered little comfort to horse or rider. But they saw no one. Hours passed in tense silence, both of them watching for signs of pursuit. The sun climbed and blazed and began its descent. The horses struggled over rocky ground. Water became scarce. It was late afternoon when they finally saw it, a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. Cook fires, civilization, San Carlos Reservation. Lily pulled her horse to a stop, staring at the smoke with eyes that suddenly brimmed with tears. 3 years. 3 years since she'd seen home. 3 years since she'd been anything more than property. 3 years since she'd been able to say her mother's name without punishment. "Are you ready?" Jack asked gently. Lily wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. That gesture again, the one she'd made in Vernon's store. Pride and courage and refusal to break. "Yes, I'm ready." They rode toward the smoke. San Carlos Reservation was not what Jack had expected. He'd heard stories about reservations, of course. Everyone had, but seeing it was different. The reality hit like a physical blow. Poverty. That was the first and strongest impression. Not the noble poverty of people making do, but the grinding, hopeless poverty of systematic neglect. Canvas tents instead of proper houses. Thin children with hollow eyes. Old people who looked ancient at 50. A government well that provided barely enough water for drinking, let alone bathing or farming. Lily's face went very still as she took it all in. "It's worse than when I left." "What happened?" "The government keeps cutting rations, keeps reducing the land we're allowed to use. 3 years ago we had gardens, corn, beans, squash. Now there's not enough water even for that." Her hands tightened on the reins. "My mother would hate to see this." They rode into the center of the reservation, where a few larger structures stood. A trading post, a small building that might have been a school once, and a circle of tents where the tribe's council apparently met. People emerged to watch them pass, curious, wary, hopeful. A young woman on a gray horse dressed in white woman's clothes but carrying herself with Apache pride. A white man with a gun who could be friend or enemy or just another disappointment in a long line of disappointments. Then someone shouted, "Lily, Lily, Winterhawk." A young man ran forward, maybe 25 years old, strong and lean, with the look of a warrior about him. He reached Lily's horse and looked up at her with a mixture of joy and disbelief. "Lily, is it really you?" "Hello, Daniel." Daniel Crowfeather. Jack would learn. Childhood friend, would-be suitor. The young man who'd promised to wait for Lily to grow up so they could marry. 3 years ago, those promises had seemed real and solid. Now they hung in the air like morning mist, beautiful but insubstantial. "We thought you were dead," Daniel said, his English heavily accented but clear. "When you didn't come back when we heard you were working for a white man in Dust Creek, we thought you were lost forever. I'm not dead, and I'm not lost anymore." Daniel's eyes shifted to Jack, seeing him properly for the first time. The joy in Daniel's face cooled into suspicion. "Who is this? Did he buy you?" "He freed me." "White men don't free anyone. They own or they abandon. Which is he?" Jack had expected this, had prepared himself for it. The Apache had every reason to distrust white men, every reason to assume the worst. He couldn't blame them for that. Before he could speak, Lily answered, "He saved me, Daniel. Vernon Hargrave had kept me in slavery for 3 years. Jack exposed Vernon's crimes and made sure I went free. He escorted me here to keep me safe from Vernon's men who wanted to recapture me. He has done nothing but help me." Daniel's suspicion didn't entirely fade, but it softened slightly. "Then I owe you thanks, white man. But Lily belongs with her people now. You can go." "I will," Jack said, "once I know she's safe." "She's safe. This is her home. We'll protect her." An older voice cut through the tension. "Daniel Crowfeather, you do not speak for the council." An elderly man approached, leaning on a walking stick but moving with dignity. His face was a map of wrinkles, each line telling a story of hardship survived and wisdom earned. His eyes were still sharp, missing nothing. "Elder Samuel," Lily breathed, sliding off her horse to kneel before him in a gesture of respect. "Samuel Graywolf." Jack would learn. 70 years old, leader of what remained of this band of Apache. He'd watched his people be forced onto this reservation, watched them slowly starve, watched their culture eroded day by day. And yet he'd maintained his dignity and his people's hope through it all. "Lily Winterhawk," Samuel said, gently placing a weathered hand on her head. "We mourned you. We thought you lost." "I'm sorry, grandfather. I couldn't come back. He wouldn't let me leave." "I know, child. I know." Samuel's eyes lifted to Jack. "And you are the man who helped her, Jackson Mercer." Why? It was the same question everyone asked. Why would a white man help an Apache girl? What did he want? What was his angle? Jack was getting tired of answering it, but he understood why it needed to be asked. Because it was the right thing to do. Samuel studied him for a long moment, those sharp eyes seeming to look straight through flesh and bone to whatever lay underneath. Then slowly he nodded. "Come, we will hear your story. The council must know what happened." The council meeting was held in the largest tent, a structure that could hold maybe 20 people if they squeezed together. The council itself consisted of Samuel and 4 other elders, 3 men and 1 woman. They sat in a semicircle, faces carved from living wood eyes that had seen too much and still somehow maintained the capacity for hope. Jack and Lily stood before them, and Lily told her story. All of it. Her mother's death, Vernon's trap, 3 years of slavery, the daily beatings, the constant hunger, the impossibility of ever paying off a debt that grew faster than she could work it down. Then Jack told his part, how he'd witnessed Vernon striking Lily, how he'd investigated and discovered the cattle rustling operation, how he'd brought evidence to light and seen Vernon and Sheriff Reed arrested, how he'd promised to escort Lily home safely. When they finished, the council conferred in Apache, their voices low and serious. Jack caught a few words, but not enough to follow the conversation. He noticed Daniel standing at the edge of the tent, arms crossed, still watching Jack with suspicion. Finally, Samuel turned back to them. "The council has decided. Lily Winterhawk is welcomed home with joy. She owes no one anything. Her debt, if it ever existed, was paid in blood and suffering. She is free." Lily's shoulders sagged with relief. "As for you, Jackson Mercer," Samuel continued, "you have done a great service to one of our people. For that you have our gratitude. However, you are still a white man, and we have learned through hard experience to be cautious. You may stay here for 3 days. In that time we will judge your character. After 3 days you will leave. If Lily wishes to go with you, that is her choice. If she wishes to stay, you will respect that choice." "I will," Jack agreed. "Good. Daniel will show you where you may camp. You are welcome to share our food and water such as they are. But do not interfere with our people or our ways. Understood?" "Understood." Outside the council tent, the sun was setting, painting the reservation in shades of orange and red. Daniel led Jack to a spot on the edge of the camp where he could set up his bedroll. His manner was stiff, polite, but cold. "Thank you," Jack said. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because the council asked." Daniel hesitated, then added, "Lily means a lot to me, to all of us. If you hurt her or try to take her away, you won't leave this reservation alive." "I'm not trying to take her anywhere. I brought her home. That was the promise." "Good, because she belongs here, with her people, with me." There it was, the real issue. Not just suspicion of white men in general, but a specific young man's fear of losing the woman he loved to an outsider. Jack understood that completely. Hell, if someone had tried to take Sarah away from him, he probably would have shot them. "She's free to choose her own path," Jack said. "That's what freedom means." Daniel walked away without responding. Jack set up his camp, tended his horse, and tried not to think about the fact that in 3 days he'd be riding away. Alone. Again. The way he'd been riding for 5 years. The way he'd probably be riding until the day he died. That night Lily came to find him. She'd washed and changed into traditional Apache dress, her hair braided with colored thread, the turquoise necklace still around her throat. She looked more herself than Jack had ever seen her, like someone slipping back into a skin that fit properly. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "You're welcome. The elders say you can only stay 3 days." "I heard." "What will you do after?" "Move on. There's always another bounty, another town, another job." Lily sat down beside him, not too close, but near enough to talk quietly. "Is that what you want? To just keep moving forever?" "I don't know what I want anymore. My mother used to say that grief makes us forget who we are, that we have to relearn ourselves piece by piece until we remember what it feels like to be whole." "How long did that take her?" "She never finished. My father left when I was born. She grieved him until the day she died, even though he'd betrayed her, even though he'd promised to come back and never did." Lily looked up at the stars. "I don't want to be like that. I don't want to spend my whole life grieving for what I lost. I want to build something new." "Then you should stay here, with your people, with Daniel, build that new life." "Maybe." Lily was quiet for a moment. "But maybe I want to figure out who I am first, without Vernon telling me I'm worthless, without my people telling me what I should be, without even you telling me I'm free. I want to feel it. I want to choose it." "That's wise." "My mother's daughter." Lily stood up. "Good night, Jack. Thank you for giving me the chance to choose." She walked back toward the main camp, leaving Jack alone with the stars and his thoughts. 3 days. Then he'd ride out, and Lily would stay here where she belonged, and everything would go back to the way it was before. Except nothing would be the same. Jack knew that. Helping Lily had changed something in him, opened a door he'd thought was locked forever. The question was whether he had the courage to step through it, or whether he'd lock it again and throw away the key. He didn't have an answer yet. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of dream. Jack woke each morning to find Daniel already awake, watching him with those suspicious eyes. He'd help with the camp work, hauling water, gathering wood, doing whatever needed doing without being asked. The Apache people slowly warmed to him, seeing that he worked without complaint and didn't demand special treatment for being white. Lily spent her time reintegrating into the community. She helped the women with cooking and sewing. She taught the children, showing them the reading and writing she'd learned. She visited her mother's grave, a small stone marker on a hillside, and spent hours there talking to the dead in a language Jack couldn't understand. On the second day, Daniel challenged Jack to a wrestling match. It wasn't unexpected. Jack had seen it coming from the moment they arrived. A young man proving his worth, marking his territory, showing the woman he loved that he was stronger than the outsider who'd brought her back. The whole camp gathered to watch. Wrestling was sport, and ritual combined a way to settle disputes without bloodshed, to prove strength and courage without killing. Jack accepted the challenge without hesitation. Refusing would have been seen as cowardice. Winning too easily would have been seen as arrogance. He needed to find a middle ground. They faced each other in a cleared space, stripped to the waist, circling warily. Daniel was younger, faster, more flexible. Jack was more experienced, stronger in the upper body, and he'd survived 5 years of close-quarters fighting across the Arizona territory. They grappled, broke apart, grappled again. Daniel was good using leverage and speed to compensate for Jack's superior strength, but Jack had been in more fights, knew more tricks. When Daniel tried to throw him using a hip toss, Jack turned it into a counter, lifting Daniel and slamming him down. The crowd cheered. Daniel rose quickly, embarrassed and angry. He came at Jack harder, faster, trying to overwhelm him with aggression. Jack let him come, absorbed the attack, found an opening, and took Daniel down again. This time, when Daniel rose, Jack extended a hand. "You're good, fast and skilled, but you're fighting angry, and anger makes mistakes." Daniel stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Pride warred with respect. Finally he took it, letting Jack pull him to his feet. "3 more rounds," Daniel said. They wrestled 3 more times. Jack won 2, Daniel won 1. By the end, both men were exhausted, covered in dust and sweat, sporting new bruises that would ache for days. But something had changed. The hostility in Daniel's eyes had been replaced by grudging respect. That evening, Daniel sat down beside Jack's fire uninvited. "You fight well for an old man." "Not that old." "Older than me." Daniel smiled slightly. "You love her, don't you, Lily?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "I respect her. I admire her courage, but I don't know her well enough to call it love." "But you could, if you had time." "Maybe, but I don't have time. I'm leaving tomorrow." "Good." Daniel poked at the fire with a stick. "Because I do love her. I've loved her since we were children. When she didn't come back from Dust Creek, I thought I'd never see her again. Now she's here, and I want to marry her. I want to build a life with her." "Have you told her that?" "Not yet. I'm waiting for you to leave first, so she knows she has a real choice, not just a white man trying to take her away from her people." "I'm not trying to take her anywhere." "I know. That's why I'm telling you this." Daniel looked at him directly. "You're a good man, Jack Mercer. Lily is lucky you found her, but she belongs here with people who understand what it means to be Apache in a world that hates us for existing. You can't give her that. You can only offer her more running, more hiding, more being different everywhere she goes." "You're probably right. I know I am." Daniel stood up. "When you leave tomorrow, leave knowing you did a good thing. You gave her back to her people. That's a gift worth more than gold." He walked away, leaving Jack alone with thoughts that circled like vultures. Daniel was right. Lily did belong here with people who understood her in ways Jack never could. She had family here, community, culture, identity. What did Jack have to offer? A life on the trail, more towns that looked like Dust Creek, more men like Vernon Hargrave, each one a fight waiting to happen. But as he lay down to sleep that night, staring up at stars that seemed close enough to touch, Jack couldn't shake a feeling of incompleteness, like he was walking away from something important before it had a chance to begin. The third morning dawned clear and cold. Jack packed his gear, slowly checking and rechecking everything, delaying the moment of departure. He'd said goodbye to the elders, received their formal thanks, and a small gift of dried meat for his journey. He'd said goodbye to the women who'd fed him, the men who'd worked beside him, the children who'd shyly asked him questions about the outside world. Only Lily remained. He found her at her mother's grave, sitting with her back against the stone marker, eyes closed, face peaceful. She opened her eyes as he approached. "You're leaving." "My 3 days are up." "I know." Lily stood brushing dust from her dress. "I wanted to thank you one more time, and to tell you something." "What's that?" "I'm not ready." Jack blinked. "Not ready for what?" "To decide. To choose. To know what I want." Lily's dark eyes met his. "You gave me freedom. But freedom is terrifying when you don't know how to use it. For 3 years, Vernon told me what to do every minute of every day. Before that, tradition told me. First my mother's expectations, then the tribe's. I've never just been Lily making choices because they're what I want, not because someone else wants them or expects them." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need time. Real time. Not 3 days. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not being someone else's property or someone else's daughter or someone else's future wife." She took a breath. "A year. Give me a year. Don't wait for me. Don't check on me. Don't write letters or send messages. Just let me have a year to find myself. Then if you still care, if you still think about me, come back. And I'll have an answer." "Lily, I'm not asking you for anything." "I know. That's why I'm asking you." She reached up and removed the turquoise necklace, the one her mother had given her, the one she'd worn through 3 years of hell. She held it out to him. "Take this. Keep it safe. When you come back in a year, give it back to me. That way I'll know you're really you and not just a memory I've made better than the reality." Jack took the necklace, feeling the smooth stones warm from her skin. "What about Daniel?" "Daniel wants to marry me. He's wanted that since we were children, and maybe I'll decide that's what I want too, but not yet. Not until I know who I am." Lily smiled, sad but hopeful. "You taught me that I'm worth more than what people say I'm worth. Now I need to learn what I'm actually worth to myself." "That's brave. That's necessary." She stepped forward and hugged him quickly, fiercely, then stepped back before he could return the embrace. "Goodbye, Jack. Thank you for everything. And please, please come back in a year, even if it's just to return the necklace." "I will," Jack promised. 1 year. He rode away from San Carlos Reservation as the sun climbed toward noon. When he looked back from the top of a distant hill, he could see Lily still standing by her mother's grave, a small figure in the vast landscape. Daniel had come to stand beside her, his hand on her shoulder, in a gesture that could have been comfort or possession or simply friendship. Jack turned his horse west and rode toward Tucson, toward the life he'd been living for 5 years, toward bounties and emptiness and the slow dissolution of a man who'd forgotten how to be more than a gun for hire. But in his pocket, warm against his chest, was a turquoise necklace, a promise, a reason to come back. 1 year. Suddenly that seemed like a very long time. The months crawled by like wounded animals. Jack found work in Tucson, the kind of work that kept his hands busy and his mind empty. He bought a small piece of land on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy, just 10 acres of desert with a thin stream running through it during the rainy season. He built a house with his own hands, 2 rooms, and a porch solid enough to last. Every nail he hammered reminded him of Sarah. She'd always wanted a house they built themselves, not something inherited or rented. Every board he measured reminded him of Emma, who used to hold the measuring tape with such serious concentration tongue stuck out between her teeth. And every evening, sitting on that porch watching the sunset, he thought of Lily. He took the turquoise necklace out, sometimes holding it up to the light, watching how the stones caught and held the colors of dusk. He'd promised not to write, not to check on her, to give her the year she needed. It was the hardest promise he'd ever kept. Grace Bennett wrote to him once a letter that found him through the Tucson marshal's office. She'd closed her boarding house in Dust Creek and moved to Tucson herself, tired of living in a town that still bore Vernon Hargrave's stain. She opened a small restaurant, the kind of place that served honest food to honest people. Jack ate there twice a week, and they'd talk about everything except the one thing that mattered most. Grace never asked about Lily. She knew about promises and the weight they carried. December came cold and clear. Jack had been in Tucson for 4 months. 8 more to go. The house was finished. The land was cleared. He had money saved from bounties he'd collected before swearing off that life. He had everything a man could need, except a reason to care about any of it. Then the letter arrived. It came through the Tucson marshal's office, forwarded from Fort Apache, written in careful English on paper that had traveled hard miles. Jack's hands trembled as he broke the seal. The words swam before his eyes. He read them once, then again, then a 3rd time to make sure he understood. Vernon Hargrave had escaped from custody during transport to the territorial prison. Deputy Marcus Webb, who'd fled Dust Creek months ago, had organized the ambush. 3 guards dead. Vernon and Webb vanished into the territory with 5 other hired guns, and they were heading toward San Carlos Reservation. The letter was from Marshal Hartley, dated 2 weeks earlier. The letter also mentioned Grace Bennett. She'd been visiting San Carlos Reservation, bringing supplies and checking on Lily. Vernon's men had taken her hostage during their escape, planning to use her as leverage. Marshal Hartley wrote, "Mrs. Bennett is with them. If Vernon reaches San Carlos before we do, she's in grave danger." Jack's blood ran cold. Grace had risked everything to help Lily, and now she was a pawn in Vernon's final act of revenge. 2 weeks. Vernon could have reached San Carlos in 3 days if he pushed hard. The reservation had no real defenses, no soldiers, just a few Apache warriors, and a lot of women, children, and elders who couldn't fight. Jack was moving before he finished reading the letter. He threw supplies into his saddlebag, filled his canteen, loaded extra ammunition for his Colt. His horse, the same steady gelding that had carried him across half of Arizona, seemed to sense the urgency. It danced impatiently as Jack cinched the saddle tight. Grace appeared in his doorway as he was leaving. She took one look at his face and understood. "Go," she said simply. "Fast as you can. I'll send word to Fort Apache, get the cavalry moving. But you'll get there first." "Thank you. Bring her back safe, Jack. Both of you come back safe." He rode out of Tucson as the sun climbed toward noon, pushing his horse hard but not cruelly, maintaining a pace that could last for days if necessary. The desert stretched before him, familiar and hostile, beautiful and deadly. He'd ridden this trail before, but never with this kind of fear driving him forward. Vernon was insane enough to attack a reservation. Webb was mean enough to help him do it. And Lily was there unprotected, unwarned, probably teaching children or tending gardens or doing any of the 100 small things that made up a life. Jack rode through the afternoon, through the night, stopping only briefly to rest his horse. He chewed dried meat without tasting it, drank water without feeling refreshed, existed in a state of focused urgency that left no room for anything except the need to get there in time. By dawn of the third day, he could see smoke rising in the distance. He pushed his exhausted horse into a final gallop, racing toward the reservation, with his heart hammering against his ribs. Please let it be cook fires. Please let it be morning preparations. Please let him be wrong about the smoke. He crested the last hill and saw hell. The reservation was under attack. 7 mounted men rode through the camp, firing guns into the air, driving people before them like cattle. Tents burned, people screamed, children ran in panic while their parents tried desperately to protect them. Jack saw Vernon Hargrave in the center of it all, his fat face twisted with rage and pleasure, combined shouting orders to his men. Webb rode beside him, methodical and efficient, directing the chaos with the skill of someone who'd done this kind of work before. They were looking for Lily. Jack drew his Colt and charged down the hill. The first shot took down one of Vernon's hired guns before the man even knew Jack was there. The sound of the gunshot cut through the chaos like a bell, and suddenly everyone was looking at the lone rider thundering toward them. Vernon's face went white, then red, then purple. "Mercer, kill him! Kill him now!" 3 men turned their horses toward Jack, guns drawn. Jack fired twice more, dropping one man and wounding another. The third man's bullet whispered past his ear, close enough to feel the heat. Jack returned fire, and the man fell backwards off his horse. 4 down, 4 left, plus Vernon and Webb. Jack's horse stumbled, hit by a stray bullet. It went down hard, throwing Jack forward. He hit the ground rolling, came up on his feet with his Colt still in hand. A bullet kicked up dirt 6 inches from his boot. He dove behind a water trough, the only cover available, and returned fire. Apache warriors were rallying now, organized by someone Jack couldn't see yet. Arrows flew from concealed positions. One of Vernon's men fell with a shaft through his shoulder. Another's horse spooked and threw him, and he was quickly surrounded by angry Apache. The tide was turning, but slowly. Vernon still had guns and position. The Apache had courage but limited weapons. It could go either way. Then Jack saw Lily. She emerged from a tent with a rifle in her hands, the Winchester he'd seen Daniel give her months ago. Her face was set with determination, her hands steady as she brought the rifle to her shoulder. She fired once, precise and calm, and another of Vernon's men fell. Vernon saw her in the same instant Jack did. His face transformed into something bestial. All his rage and humiliation and wounded pride focused on the young woman who'd escaped his control. He spurred his horse toward her, drawing a knife. Jack ran. He crossed the open ground between the water trough and Lily's position in seconds that felt like hours. Vernon was closer, but Jack was faster. He slammed into Vernon's horse from the side, grabbing Vernon by the leg and pulling him down. They crashed to the ground together, Vernon's knife slashing wildly. Jack caught his wrist twisted, felt bones grind. Vernon screamed and dropped the knife. Jack punched him in the face, feeling satisfaction as Vernon's nose broke under his knuckles. Vernon wasn't finished. Years of comfortable living hadn't completely destroyed the mean street fighter he'd once been. He grabbed dirt and threw it in Jack's eyes, momentarily blinding him. Then he was up and running, not toward his horse, but toward Lily, who'd turned to reload her rifle. Jack wiped his eyes clear just in time to see Vernon grab Lily from behind his thick arm around her throat, using her as a shield. He'd retrieved his knife somehow, and now he held it against her ribs. "Back off, Mercer!" Vernon shouted. "Back off, or I gut her right here!" The fighting around them had stopped. Apache warriors and Vernon's remaining men both frozen, watching this central drama play out. Webb had retreated to the edge of the camp, calculating odds, deciding whether his loyalty was worth dying for. Jack stood slowly, hands raised to show he wasn't holding his gun. "You don't want to do this, Vernon." "Don't I? This little savage cost me everything. My business, my reputation, my freedom. She deserves to die, and you deserve to watch. She didn't cost you anything. You destroyed yourself. You chose to traffic in stolen goods. You chose to keep a human being in slavery. You chose to corrupt the law. Every consequence you faced, you earned." "Shut up! Shut your mouth!" Vernon pressed the knife harder against Lily's side. A thin line of blood appeared, staining her dress. "I'm taking her with me. I'm selling her to the highest bidder in Mexico, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." Lily's eyes met Jack's across the dusty ground. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging. Even with a knife against her ribs and death breathing on her neck, she maintained that dignity that had first caught Jack's attention months ago. She mouthed 2 words. "Trust me." Then she drove her elbow back into Vernon's substantial gut with all her strength. Vernon gasped, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Lily twisted away, dropping to the ground as Vernon slashed at empty air where she'd been. Jack's Colt was up and firing before Vernon could recover. The bullet took him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. Vernon screamed, clutching the wound, the knife falling from his nerveless fingers. Apache warriors surged forward, surrounding Vernon, pressing him to the ground. He struggled briefly, then went limp, either from pain or from finally understanding that his power was truly broken. Webb, seeing his employer captured and bleeding, made the smart choice. He spurred his horse and ran racing away from the reservation faster than he'd come. 2 Apache warriors started to give chase, but Elder Samuel's voice stopped them. "Let him go. He's someone else's problem now." Jack crossed to Lily, who was climbing to her feet with Daniel's help. The knife wound in her side was shallow, more blood than damage, but it still made Jack's hands shake with residual fear. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." Lily smiled, shaky but genuine. "You came back early." "Vernon escaped. I couldn't wait." "I'm glad you didn't." Daniel looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You came back for her." "I came back to keep her safe." "That's the same thing." Daniel released Lily's arm and stepped back. "Thank you, Jack Mercer. For the second time you've saved someone I love. I won't forget that." Elder Samuel approached, leaning heavily on his walking stick, surveying the damage to his reservation. 2 tents burned. Several people injured. One elder had died of a heart attack during the chaos, but it could have been so much worse. "We are in your debt again, Jackson Mercer." "No debt, just doing what needed to be done." "Nevertheless." Samuel looked at Vernon, now bound and guarded by 4 warriors. "What should we do with this one?" "Marshal Hartley should be here in a few days with cavalry. They'll take him to the territorial prison, and this time they'll make sure he doesn't escape." Jack paused. "I'd like to request that Lily testify at his trial. Her testimony, what he did to her, it'll make sure he never gets free again." Samuel looked at Lily. "Is that what you want, child?" Lily stared at Vernon for a long moment. The man who'd stolen 3 years of her life, who'd beaten her, starved her, worked her until she collapsed, who'd just tried to kill her rather than let her be free. She should have felt hatred, should have wanted revenge. Instead, she just felt tired. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll testify, not for revenge, but so other girls don't end up like I did, so other Vernon Hargraves learn there are consequences." "Then it's settled." Samuel turned to the gathered tribe. "We will repair what was damaged. We will mourn who we lost. We will remember that even in darkness light finds a way to break through. This man, this white man named Jackson Mercer, he is that light. He is welcome among us always." The formal words meant something Jack understood, more than just gratitude. Among the Apache, such a declaration meant he was family now, protected, trusted, belonging. It was more than he'd ever expected, more than he probably deserved. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Tents were rebuilt, wounds were tended. Vernon remained bound and under guard, sullen and silent, except when he ranted about the injustice of his situation. The Apache ignored him, treating him with the contempt he'd earned. Jack helped where he could, but mostly he found himself watching Lily. She moved through the camp with quiet efficiency, comforting children who'd been frightened by the attack, helping tend the wounded, organizing the rebuilding effort. She was different than she'd been 4 months ago. Stronger, more confident, more fully herself. On the evening of the 3rd day, she found him sitting apart from the main camp, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and purple. "You're thinking about leaving," she said, settling down beside him. "The cavalry will be here tomorrow. Vernon will be taken away. You'll be safe. My job here is done." "Is that what you think? That your only purpose was keeping me safe?" "Isn't it?" Lily was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. 4 months ago, I asked you for a year to figure out who I am, to make my own choices without Vernon or tradition or anyone else telling me what I should want. I remember. I've spent 4 months doing that, learning to hunt again, teaching children, sitting with elders and listening to stories, helping Daniel organize defenses for the next time someone decides we're easy targets. I've remembered who I was and discovered who I want to be. And who's that? Someone who makes her own choices. Lily turned to look at him directly, her dark eyes steady. Daniel asked me to marry him 2 months ago. He loves me. He's a good man. We'd have a good life together. Jack's heart sank. He'd known this was coming, had prepared himself for it. Lily belonged here with her people, with a man who understood her culture and her history in ways Jack never could. It was right. It was proper. It was what he'd expected from the beginning. I told him no, Lily continued. Jack blinked. What? I told him no. Not because I don't care for him, not because he's not worthy, but because my heart doesn't choose him. She reached out and took Jack's hand, her fingers warm and small in his. The wind changed Jack. Do you know what my mother used to tell me? She said the wind tells you which direction to go if you're brave enough to listen. For 4 months I've been listening, and the wind keeps pointing toward you. Lily, I'm 23 years older than you. I'm a bounty hunter with ghosts I'll never shake. I've got nothing to offer you except a half-built house and a life that's more scars than dreams. You're also the man who saw me getting beaten and decided to care, who risked his life to free me, who kept his promise even when it cost him, who came racing across the desert to protect me from Vernon when he could have just stayed safe in Tucson. Lily squeezed his hand. I don't want perfect. I want real. I want someone who sees me as an equal, not as property, or as a prize, or as a responsibility. You gave me freedom, and now I'm using that freedom to choose you. If you'll have me. Jack looked at their joined hands, Lily's brown skin against his weathered tan, young and old, Apache and white. All the reasons it shouldn't work, couldn't work, was doomed to fail. And none of it mattered compared to the feeling in his chest, like something frozen for 5 years was finally beginning to thaw. I have your necklace, he said quietly, pulling it from his pocket. I kept it safe like you asked. I know you did. Lily took the necklace and fastened it around her throat where it belonged. Now keep me safe, not because I can't protect myself, but because we protect each other. That's what partners do. Partners, Jack repeated, testing the word. It felt right. Better than husband and wife with all their assumptions and traditions. Partners meant equals, meant choice, meant freedom to build something new instead of trying to fit into something old. Partners, Lily confirmed. If you want. Jack pulled her close, feeling her head rest against his shoulder, her hair smelling of smoke and sage, and something indefinably her. For the first time since Sarah and Emma died, he let himself imagine a future that wasn't just empty roads and hollow victories. I want, he said simply. They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, thousands of them, more than anyone could count. Tomorrow the cavalry would come. Vernon would be taken away to face justice. The formal trial would happen, and Lily would testify, and a judge would sentence Vernon Hargrave to spend the rest of his miserable life in territorial prison. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was just this moment. Two people who'd been broken by loss and suffering sitting under an infinite sky, choosing to build something new from the pieces they had left. Marshal Hartley arrived the next morning with 20 cavalry soldiers. They took Vernon into custody, shackled hand and foot, loading him onto a wagon for transport. Vernon tried to speak, to threaten, to promise revenge, but nobody listened. He was just noise now, meaningless and impotent. Before Hartley left, he pulled Jack aside. "I heard you bought land near Tucson. 10 acres. Got a house built, mostly finished. Planning to settle down. Thinking about it." Hartley glanced at Lily, who was saying goodbye to Daniel and the other Apache. "With her, if she'll have me." "She already said yes, Jack. I can tell from here." Hartley smiled slightly. "You did good work in Dust Creek. You did good work here. If you ever want a marshal's badge instead of chasing bounties, let me know. The territory needs good men." "I'll think about it." "You do that." Hartley extended his hand. "Take care of her, and let her take care of you. That's what partnership means." After the cavalry left, Jack and Lily prepared for their own departure. Elder Samuel blessed their journey with words in Apache that Jack didn't understand but felt in his bones. Daniel gave them supplies, and a second horse, a gesture of acceptance and letting go combined. "If he doesn't treat you right," Daniel told Lily, "you come back. You'll always have a home here." "I know. Thank you, Daniel, for everything, for loving me enough to let me choose." They embraced once old friends, acknowledging that their paths were diverging, and rode out together into the desert. The journey to Tucson took 4 days, traveling at an easy pace, no longer running from anything or racing toward danger. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Lily told Jack about her childhood, about Apache traditions and beliefs, about her mother's wisdom and her father's betrayal. Jack told Lily about Sarah, and Emma really told her this time, holding nothing back. The good memories and the painful ones. The guilt he carried and the grief that never quite healed. He showed her the locket he still carried, and Lily touched it gently, reverently, understanding that she wasn't replacing anyone, but rather joining a story already in progress. "They'll always be part of you," she said. "I don't want you to forget them. They made you who you are, and who you are is who I choose." On the evening of the 4th day, they crested a hill and saw Tucson spread out below them, buildings glowing in the sunset. Jack pointed to a small structure on the outskirts of town, barely visible in the fading light. "That's home. It's not much, but it's ours if you want it." "I want it," Lily said. "I want you. I want us." They rode down the hill together as the sun set behind them and the stars began their eternal watch overhead. Two people who'd survived hell and come out the other side, choosing to build heaven from whatever materials they had at hand. They held a small wedding ceremony at Jack's ranch. It was simple, combining elements of both Apache and white traditions. Elder Samuel traveled from San Carlos to officiate. Daniel came bringing gifts from the tribe. The few neighbors Jack had made in Tucson attended, along with Marshal Hartley and several townspeople who remembered the story of Vernon Hargrave's downfall. There was one empty chair at the ceremony. Jack had set it there deliberately with a single white rose on the seat. For Grace Bennett, who had brought them together, who had sheltered Lily when no one else would, who had given her life so they could have their future. Before the ceremony began, Lily placed her hand on the chair's back. "Thank you, Grace," she whispered, "for everything. Nothing fancy, just good food and good company and a justice of the peace who'd known Jack for years." The ceremony was brief, combining elements of both Apache and white traditions, creating something new that belonged to both of them and neither of them simultaneously. "Do you, Jackson Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Lily Winterhawk, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jack kissed Lily gently, aware of the weight of the moment, the promise being made, the future unfurling before them like a road they'd travel together. When they pulled apart, Lily was smiling, and Jack realized with some surprise that he was smiling too. It felt strange. It felt right. It felt like something he'd forgotten was possible. The months that followed were not easy, but they were good. Jack and Lily worked together to finish the house, adding rooms and improvements as they went. Lily planted a garden using seeds and techniques from the reservation, coaxing life from desert soil that seemed determined to stay barren. Jack took Marshal Hartley up on his offer, accepting a deputy marshal position that let him work close to home instead of ranging across the territory. They built a life that was neither wholly Apache nor wholly white, but something in between, something theirs. Lily taught Apache children who came to visit, sharing her mother's stories and traditions. Jack helped build a school on the San Carlos reservation, using his marshal's salary and influence to secure funding from the territorial government. They bridged two worlds, not perfectly, but honestly, with patience and respect and love. A year after their wedding, Lily told Jack she was pregnant. He'd been sitting on the porch watching the sunset, as had become his habit, when she emerged from the house with her hand on her slightly rounded belly. She didn't say anything, just looked at him with eyes that asked a question and answered it simultaneously. Jack crossed to her in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees, pressing his ear against her stomach as if he could hear the tiny heartbeat inside. Tears ran down his weathered face, tears he didn't bother to hide or wipe away. "Are you scared?" Lily asked softly, running her fingers through his hair. "Terrified." "Me too." She knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. "But we'll be scared together. That's what partners do." Partners. Jack agreed, the word that had become their foundation, their promise, their shared truth. The baby came in the spring, a girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Emma Morningstar Mercer, honoring both the daughter Jack had lost and the mother Lily still mourned. She was loud and healthy and perfect. Jack held his daughter for the first time with hands that shook, terrified he'd drop her or hurt her or fail her the way he'd failed Emma the first. But Lily was there beside him, steady and strong, showing him how to support the tiny head, how to recognize her cries, how to be a father again. "She's beautiful," Jack whispered, watching Emma Morningstar's tiny fingers wrap around his thumb. "She's ours," Lily corrected. "And we're going to make sure she grows up knowing she's loved and free and capable of anything." "Yes," Jack agreed. "We are." 5 years passed, then 10 more. 15 years after their wedding, the house on the outskirts of Tucson had grown substantially. The house on the outskirts of Tucson grew, adding rooms for the children that kept coming. 3 more after Emma. 2 boys and another girl, each one a miracle Jack had stopped believing in. The garden expanded, producing enough vegetables to share with neighbors. The horses multiplied, providing both transportation and income. Jack's reputation as a fair and honest lawman spread throughout the territory. He never drew his gun unless absolutely necessary, preferring words and patience to bullets and blood. But everyone knew that Fast Draw Mercer was still there underneath the badge, ready if needed, protecting the innocent and pursuing the guilty with equal determination. Lily became known as a healer and teacher. Her mother's knowledge of herbs and medicine combined with white medical texts she studied voraciously. People came from miles around for her treatments, paying what they could accepted, regardless of their ability to pay. She taught children from both Apache and white communities, believing that education was the bridge between understanding and hatred. They were happy, not perfectly, not without struggles and sorrows and setbacks, but happy in the way that matters, built on respect and choice and partnership. On an evening in their 15th year together, Jack sat on the porch watching another sunset paint the sky. Lily emerged from the house, moving slower now, her hair showing threads of gray, her face marked by the years, but still beautiful in the way that mattered to him. She settled beside him, her hand finding his automatically. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Emma Morningstar, now 14, was teaching her younger siblings to shoot a bow her Uncle Daniel had sent from the reservation. The boys were arguing about technique. The youngest girl was just trying to hit the target at all. "Do you ever regret it?" Lily asked. "Choosing this life instead of the one you had before?" Jack thought about it seriously, as he always did when Lily asked him questions. About Sarah and Emma in Tombstone, about the years of drifting and bounty hunting, about the empty house and the hollow victories. About the man he'd been before, a slap echoed like a gunshot and changed everything. "I regret not being there for Sarah and Emma," he said honestly. "I'll always regret that. But I don't regret finding you. I don't regret building this life. The past shaped me, but you gave me a future." "We gave each other a future," Lily corrected gently. "You saved me from Vernon. I saved you from yourself. That's what partners do." Partners. Jack agreed, the word that had sustained them through 15 years of joy and struggle, triumph and tragedy, life fully lived instead of merely survived. The sun set. The stars emerged. The children eventually tired of archery and came inside for dinner. Jack and Lily remained on the porch a moment longer, hands intertwined, watching the day surrender to night. "I love you." Jack said the words easier now than they'd been at first, but no less meaningful. "I love you too," Lily replied. "Thank you for not walking away that day. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked through me. Thank you for giving me a reason to care again, for reminding me that a heart can break and still heal, for showing me that freedom is something you choose, not something you're given." They kissed, gentle and familiar, the kiss of two people who knew each other completely and chose each other anyway. Then they went inside together into the warm house, filled with the noise and chaos and love of a family they'd built from the wreckage of their individual pasts. Vernon Hargrave died in territorial prison 7 years into his sentence, unmourned and unremembered by anyone except the people he'd hurt. Deputy Marcus Webb was eventually caught in New Mexico and hanged for murder. Sheriff Clayton Reed served his time and died a broken man. His corruption exposed his reputation, destroyed his comfortable life revealed as built on the suffering of others. Justice, slow but inevitable. The reservation at San Carlos gradually improved as federal policy shifted and decent administrators replaced corrupt ones. It was never enough, never what it should have been, but it was better than the starvation and neglect of earlier years. Jack and Lily worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the Apache and white communities, building, understanding one conversation at a time. Daniel Crowfeather eventually married an Apache woman from another band, had children of his own, and became a respected leader on the reservation. He and Jack developed a friendship based on mutual respect, and shared love for Lily transformed from rivals into brothers by choice, if not by blood. Grace Bennett lived to be 92 years old, presiding over her restaurant with benevolent authority, feeding anyone who was hungry, regardless of their ability to pay. She attended Jack and Lily's 15th wedding anniversary celebration, gave a speech about stubbornness and second chances, and told everyone who would listen that she'd known they were meant for each other from the very beginning. Years turned into decades. Children grew. Gray hair became white. Strong backs bent. Quick reflexes slowed. Jack and Lily aged together, watching their children become adults, welcoming grandchildren into a world that was gradually, imperfectly becoming slightly less brutal and slightly more just. On their 30th wedding anniversary, they returned to Dust Creek. The town had changed, grown, shed some of its darker history, like a snake shedding skin. Vernon's old general store was now owned by a decent man who paid fair wages and treated workers with respect. The sheriff's office had a competent and honest lawman. The boarding house where Grace Bennett once sheltered Lily was now a proper hotel. They walked through the town together, Jack leaning on a cane, now Lily's hand on his arm for support and companionship. They stopped outside what had once been Vernon's store, the place where everything began. "Do you remember?" Jack asked. "Every detail." Lily looked up at him, her face lined, but her eyes still sharp. "The slap that sounded like a gunshot, your face through the window, the moment I knew someone finally saw me." I was thinking about Sarah and Emma that day, thinking about failure and regret. Then I saw you, and suddenly failure seemed like something I could fix. Regret seemed like something I could transform. You did transform it. We both did. Lily squeezed his arm. 30 years, Jack. 30 years of partnership, of choosing each other every day, of building something good from something broken, worth every moment. They continued their walk, moving slowly now, no longer the young people who'd ridden out of this town decades ago, but still together, still choosing each other, still partners. The sun set over Dust Creek, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and purple it had painted 30 years before. Jack and Lily stood together watching it, two people who'd survived hell and built heaven, who'd turned suffering into strength and loss into love. "What are you thinking?" Lily asked the question she'd asked him 1,000 times over 3 decades. Jack pulled out the locket. He still carried the one with Sarah and Emma's faces inside. He looked at it for a long moment, then carefully placed it in Lily's hand. "I'm thinking it's time to let go of ghosts and hold on to what's real. I'm thinking Sarah would be proud of the man I became because of you. I'm thinking Emma would have loved her namesake and her siblings and the life we built." He closed Lily's fingers around the locket. "I'm thinking this belongs with our family story now, not hidden in my pocket like a secret shame. A reminder of where I came from, but not a weight holding me down." Lily opened the locket, studied the faces inside, then closed it gently. "They were part of your journey to me. We'll honor them together." "Together," Jack agreed. "Always together." They walked back toward their hotel, moving slowly, content with the pace, no longer running from anything or toward anything. Just being, just living, just loving. The stars emerged overhead, infinite and eternal, watching, as they'd watched for 30 years, as they'd watch for however many years remained. Two people who'd started as broken strangers and become whole partners, writing a story that began with violence and ended with love. And in the morning, they'd ride back to Tucson, back to their house and their children and their grandchildren, back to the life they'd chosen and built and defended and nurtured into something worth more than gold. Back home. Together.